Why did Margaret Ann West, a young kitchen maid, suddenly collapse unconscious onto the scorching stone hearth in the kitchen of a prestigious London mansion on Belgrave Square on a sweltering July day in 1871? At that very moment, on the floor above, exquisite turtle soup and roasted pheasant were being served on silver trays to Lord Penrhyn's guests. The air in the basement was so scorching from the enormous coal stove that it seemed almost impossible to breathe there. The head chef merely ordered irritably that the girl be dragged into a dark corner so she wouldn't interfere with the preparation of the sumptuous dessert. None of the noble guests in the gleaming dining room even suspected that their magnificent dinner had been paid for by a person who had fainted from hunger. This shocking incident in the very heart of Victorian London remained hidden behind the closed doors of luxurious mansions for a long time. Today, we'll take a look into the darkest corners of the wealthiest 19th century homes, where the glitter of gold coexisted with appalling poverty. You'll see the true underside of an era that is often idealized in novels and historical films. Many documents from those years were deliberately destroyed by the estate owners to hide the truth from the public. Unique archival evidence, pieced together bit by bit, will allow us to reconstruct the true picture of what happened. In this video, we'll take a detailed look at doctors' diaries, health inspectors' reports, and the personal notes of the servants themselves. We'll compare the calorie content of the Lord's lavish menus with the meager rations of those who prepared these feasts with their own hands. You'll learn about the hidden resistance of the domestic staff and how cutting corners on food turned into a lucrative business for the housekeeper. Our story will reveal how, behind the beautiful facades of Belgravia, a real struggle for survival was unfolding. Watch the video to the end, and you'll discover how one kitchen maid's fainting spell from hunger led to a major investigation by the UK Department of Health and changed labour laws. We often think of the Victorian era as a time of strict morals, lavish balls, and the impeccable manners of high society. However, behind this flawless facade lay a massive domestic workforce, numbering over 1 million people by 1881. Huge country estates and city townhouses required constant care, which was provided by young girls from poor families. Most of them began working at the age of 12, becoming completely dependent on the whims of their employers. Their workday often lasted 16 hours, beginning long before dawn and ending late at night. Architects of that era designed houses so that the masters would never accidentally cross paths with their servants. In his famous 1864 book, architect Robert Kerr described in detail the principles of isolating kitchen areas from living quarters. The smells of food being prepared were considered vulgar, so kitchens were relegated to basements or distant wings of the buildings. Servants moved through special, unlit corridors and spiral staircases hidden from the eyes of their employers. This spatial segregation created the illusion that all household chores were carried out on their own, without human effort. The contrast between the abundance on the master's table and the servants' rations was truly staggering. While the masters enjoyed an abundance of meat dishes and expensive French wines, the servants received strictly rationed meals. Their diet consisted mainly of cheap white bread, low-quality salted butter, and weak tea without sugar. Fresh vegetables and fruits almost never made it to the kitchen staff's tables. Even leftovers from the master's table were carefully locked away in special cupboards. Control over the household's food supplies was exercised by the housekeeper, whose position was highly privileged. At estates such as Languedoc in Cornwall, the housekeeper, Mrs. Penrose, kept strict records of every loaf of bread. She received bonuses from the owners for saving on the budget for maintaining the household staff. This created a direct financial incentive to cut back on the portions served to the lower-ranking staff. Kitchen maids and dishwashers occupied the very bottom rung of this rigid domestic hierarchy. The physical workload for the kitchen staff was incredibly heavy and required enormous amounts of energy. The dishwashers had to carry buckets of hot water weighing up to 15 kilograms up several flights of stairs. Scrubbing heavy copper cookware with sand and acid drained the last of the exhausted girl's strength. In the summer, Temperatures near the coal stoves rose above 40 degrees Celsius. Constant exposure to the stuffy, dark basement undermined the health of even the strongest workers. Due to constant malnutrition and a lack of sunlight, many of the young women developed anemia. Medical examinations from those years documented catastrophic levels of exhaustion among the kitchen assistants. Many of them suffered from chronic weakness, dizziness, and frequent fainting spells. The household's owners often attributed these fainting spells to the natural frailty and laziness of women. Instead of a proper meal, the young women were offered smelling salts or cold water splashed on their faces. At the same time, the amount of food wasted in wealthy households was simply astronomical. Elaborate French banquets featured up to 12 courses, most of which remained untouched. Etiquette rules forbade serving the same dish twice at the master's table. However, instead of giving these leftovers to the hungry servants, they were often thrown away or sold off. Top-tier chefs were allowed to take the excess fat and bones to resell to soap makers. The psychological pressure on the starving servants was exacerbated by the constant sight of others' opulence. Young female cooks spent hours crafting intricate pastry masterpieces and aspic dishes. They breathed in the aromas of roasted meat, spices, and expensive sauces all day long. Attempting to eat even a tiny piece of the master's pie was considered theft and punished by immediate dismissal without a letter of recommendation. Without recommendations, a dismissed servant was doomed to poverty or forced to seek other dangerous ways to survive on the streets. This system of cruel control and hidden starvation existed for decades behind the beautiful facades of Britain's finest homes. But there were people who tried to change the established order and assert the rights of domestic servants. One such prominent figure was the famous chef Charles Elm Francatelli, who worked for Queen Victoria herself. I'd love to hear your perspective. What do you think about this striking contrast between the luxury of the masters and the poverty of the servants in Victorian England? Please share your thoughts in the comments. But how exactly did the famous royal chef try to combat this injustice in his own kitchen? Charles Elm Francatelli took charge of the royal kitchen at St. James's Palace in 1840. He was a student of the great French chef Antonin Carême and adhered to the strict standards of haute cuisine. Dozens of assistants, cooks, and kitchen hands who performed the dirtiest work labored in his kitchen. Francatelli quickly noticed that the junior staff was in a state of extreme physical exhaustion. He began to openly clash with palace officials who demanded cuts to the servants' food budget. 19th century palace kitchens resembled sweltering, poorly ventilated factory workshops. Huge stoves emitted carbon monoxide, and the air temperature often exceeded all permissible limits. Junior cooks spent 18 hours a day on their feet, performing heavy, monotonous work. They peeled vegetables, gutted poultry, and continuously washed dishes in cold water. In his book, Francatelli wrote in detail about the importance of properly caring for the health of kitchen workers. The famous chef attempted to introduce mandatory hearty meals for all categories of servants in the palace kitchen. He personally inspected the quality of the food supplied to the lower-ranking staff. This provoked sharp discontent from the Lord Steward, who was responsible for managing the royal budget. Francatelli was accused of excessive extravagance and pandering to the whims of lazy servants. Despite pressure from above, he continued to insist that a hungry worker is incapable of creating culinary masterpieces. In 1852, Francatelli published a unique book titled Asterisk, a Simple Cookbook for the Working Class Asterisk. In this work, he offered nutritious and inexpensive recipes for the poor and domestic servants. He sincerely wanted to teach ordinary people how to manage their modest resources wisely and avoid starvation. The book contained practical advice on choosing inexpensive meat and properly preparing rich broths. This move demonstrated that the royal chef deeply sympathized with the plight of the starving working class. However, outside the royal palace, conditions in private mansions remained inhumane. Most aristocrats completely ignored their servants' need for quality food. The Duke of Bedford strictly limited his servants' rations at his estate to cheap oatmeal soup. The kitchen staff had no say in the matter and obediently endured any hardships for fear of losing their jobs. Any dissatisfaction with the quality of the food was viewed by the masters as a rebellion against the established order. A chronic lack of nutrients led to rapid professional burnout and illness. Kitchen maids lost their teeth and suffered from joint diseases due to the constant dampness. Francatelli noted that the average length of service for a young woman in the kitchen rarely exceeded 3 years. After that, they left service with their health completely ruined and without any means of support. The Victorian-era domestic service system literally ground down human lives for the sake of the elite's comfort. For lunch, the hosts were served the famous veal head soup, which was meant to imitate an expensive turtle soup. Preparing it required dozens of hours of work by junior cooks and kitchen maids. At the same time, the kitchen maids themselves ate stale bread with a slice of salted lard for lunch. They were forbidden to drink fresh milk, which was reserved exclusively for the lord's coffee and desserts. The psychological trauma caused by such daily humiliation crippled the lives of hundreds of thousands of young female workers. Francatelli's fight for the rights of kitchen servants ultimately led to his forced resignation from the post of royal chef. The court bureaucracy did not forgive him for his independent nature and his concern for the lower ranks of the staff. He continued his career at the prestigious Reform Club, where he also strove to maintain high standards of nutrition for the servants. His successors in the royal kitchen proved to be more compliant and willingly cut back on the rations of the manual labourers. Francatelli's story clearly demonstrated just how strong the system's resistance was to any attempts at humanization. Official reports from London hospitals in the 1870s documented hundreds of cases of kitchen servants being hospitalized. The primary diagnosis for young women was extreme exhaustion resulting from excessive physical labor. Many of them were admitted to hospitals directly from their workplaces in the wealthy mansions of Mayfair. The owners of these homes never paid for the treatment of their sick workers. Instead, they simply replaced them with new, healthy young women arriving from the country's impoverished rural areas. Behind the scenes of this culinary splendor lay a ruthless mathematical calculation that turned calories into money. But to truly understand the full scale of this injustice, we need to look into the ledgers of Victorian housekeepers. There, amid the dry figures for flour and meat expenses, lies a precise calculation of how the wealthy saved money at the expense of the poor. We'll conduct a detailed comparison of the royal menu and the rations of an ordinary kitchen maid to reveal the economics of hunger in all its grotesque grandeur. Are you ready to find out exactly how many grams of meat separated a master's well-fed life from the starvation of his loyal servant? In 1861, Isabella Beeton's legendary book on household management was published, becoming the Bible of the Victorian middle class. This monumental work described in detail not only recipes, but also strict rules for managing domestic servants. Mrs. Beeton approached housekeeping with a purely Victorian businesslike practicality and a striving for perfect order. She maintained that a good housewife must strictly control each servant's diet to save the family budget. Her book legitimized the practice of strictly rationing food for domestic staff in thousands of households. A typical lunch for a Victorian gentleman consisted of a huge amount of high-calorie meat and fish dishes. The menu in a wealthy household included baked salmon, saddle of lamb, beef tenderloin, a variety of game, and an abundance of sweet puddings. The tables were literally groaning under the weight of expensive delicacies and thick sauces. The caloric value of such a daily diet for the head of the household easily exceeded 5,000 kilocalories. This was an incredible amount of food for a single person. Most of this heavy, fatty food could not physically be digested by the sedentary aristocrats. Wealthy Londoners rarely engaged in physical labor and mostly traveled in comfortable carriages. As a result, gout and heart disease were incredibly widespread among high society. At the same time, leftovers from these exquisite dishes were ruthlessly thrown away or given to the household dogs. Serving yesterday's meat again at the master's table was considered unacceptable bad form. At the same time, the daily diet of a junior kitchen maid rarely exceeded 1,500 kilocalories of cheap, carbohydrate-rich food. These young women's days began long before dawn and consisted of endless floor scrubbing and fireplace cleaning. With such an extremely low caloric intake, their grueling physical labor required at least 3,500 kilocalories per day. The servants' bodies were worked to the bone every day for the sake of their master's comfort. The girls' main meal consisted of cheap bread made from very coarsely ground flour. This bread was often mixed with chalk or gypsum to increase the loaf's weight. Butter was rationed in strictly limited quantities. Moreover, it was almost always rancid, stale, or too salty. Servants received meat no more than twice a week. Usually, these were the cheapest trimmings, cartilage, or tough tendons, which were used to make broth. When the masters went on country trips or to fashionable European resorts, the servants' lives changed. The servants were officially put on what was known as board-day money. This was a very modest monetary allowance for the duration of the master's absence. With these coins, the servants remaining in the house had to buy their own food. The amount of this allowance was calculated by the housekeeper based on the very lowest possible standard. The allocated money was woefully insufficient to purchase wholesome and fresh food. The servants had to go to the evening sales at local street markets. There, they bought the cheapest offal, spoiled vegetables, and completely stale bread. Many owners of luxurious mansions deliberately underpaid their servants. In this cruel way, they tried to at least partially offset their enormous expenses on long journeys. The quality of the food sold to the poor and to servants was simply appalling. City merchants, driven by profit, often diluted milk with dirty water straight from the Thames. To conceal this adulteration and restore the milk's thickness, they added ground sheep brains. Bakers unabashedly mixed alum into cheap flour. This was done specifically to make poor quality bread appear whiter and more appealing to buyers. Regular consumption of such adulterated products led to very serious health consequences. Servants suffered from chronic digestive disorders and a severe weakening of their immune systems. The young women were often ill but had no means to pay for medical care. As a result, the servants were constantly in a state of hidden and agonizing hunger. And this was the case even when they lived in wealthy homes, literally overflowing with exotic delicacies. Access to food in the mansion was always strictly controlled. The butler and the housekeeper kept a close watch to ensure that the lower-ranking staff did not steal food from the spacious pantries. All rooms containing food supplies were securely locked with heavy padlocks. This took place every evening before the senior servants retired for the night. No one could sneak up to the food at night unnoticed. The punishment for any attempt to satisfy one's hunger was incredibly severe. For stealing a single apple or a handful of raisins, a young woman faced immediate dismissal in disgrace. Afterward, she was usually handed over to the police right away. London court records from the 1860s are full of cases involving petty theft of food. At the same time, an official system of perquisites existed in these households. This term referred to the hidden, yet entirely legal income that senior servants earned through strict frugality. For example, a cook had the legal right to sell surplus fat and bones. Large quantities of these remained in the kitchen after preparing lavish meals for the masters. This cooking fat was highly prized among poor Londoners. Instead of giving this nutritious fat to the starving kitchen maids, the cooks would take it away to sell. The money from the sales went directly into the head chef's pocket. This significantly increased his personal annual income and compelled him to economize even more. Due to a constant lack of animal protein and high-quality fats, the young maid's muscles gradually wasted away. A chronic vitamin deficiency led to early tooth loss and constantly bleeding gums. Many young maids looked like completely emaciated old women by the time they reached 20 years of their hard lives. Despite this, the mansion owners strictly demanded that the staff always look neat and cheerful. The young women had to use cheap makeup to hide the deathly pallor of their faces caused by constant malnutrition. The entire system was structured in such a way that the lower classes would always remain in absolute submission. Hunger in the kitchen was not merely a coincidence, but a crucial element of the rigid Victorian class structure. But what was the true physical condition of these people, hidden beneath layers of uniform? Only impartial witnesses of the era, armed with medical knowledge and stethoscopes, can tell us. In the next chapter, we will examine the personal diaries of doctors who were the first to sound the alarm about the health of domestic servants. What exactly did London doctors discover when examining emaciated kitchen maids in the city's prestigious neighbourhoods? Dr. John Simon became London's first medical inspector of public health in the mid-19th century. He was an outstanding scientist and humanitarian who dedicated his life to combating epidemics and poverty. As part of his work, he conducted large-scale health inspections in various districts of the British capital. Simon was one of the first to point out that behind the facades of wealthy homes, a veritable sanitary disaster was unfolding. His annual reports to the Ministry of Health contained shocking data on the health conditions of domestic servants. During his examinations of the kitchen staff, Dr. Simon regularly documented extreme cases of physical exhaustion. He found that many kitchen maids suffered from specific occupational diseases. Due to constant work near red-hot coal stoves, the young women developed chronic lung diseases. The lack of proper ventilation led to constant inhalation of coal dust and carbon monoxide. The doctor described these basement kitchens as veritable tombs, where young lives slowly faded away. Constantly carrying heavy loads up steep staircases led to serious cardiovascular problems. Simon diagnosed many of the young women with enlarged hearts and varicose veins. Their legs were constantly swollen and covered with painful trophic ulcers from standing for hours on end. Due to malnutrition, the body's tissues lost their ability to regenerate and heal quickly. The owners of the mansions dismissed sick maids without severance pay as soon as they became unable to work. The mortality rate among domestic servants in London was comparable to that of miners. Tuberculosis was the leading cause of death among young kitchen maids during the Victorian era. The infection spread rapidly in the dark, damp, and overcrowded servants' bedrooms in the attics. Dr. Simon noted that overcrowding and a lack of fresh air contributed to the rapid progression of the disease. Weakened by hunger, the young women's bodies had virtually no strength left to fight the dangerous illness. In his reports, Simon drew a bold comparison between the working conditions of domestic servants and factory workers. He argued that factory workers were in a far more advantageous position thanks to government oversight. The Factory Act limited the workday and required compliance with minimum sanitary standards in the workshops. Domestic servants remained completely defenseless against the arbitrariness and greed of their employers. No inspector had the right to enter a lord's private residence without his personal permission. The sanitary conditions in the basements where servants lived and worked were extremely poor. Tap water was often contaminated and undrinkable without first being boiled. Servants were rarely allowed to use expensive coal to boil water for their own needs. They were forced to drink untreated water, which led to constant outbreaks of intestinal infections. Dr. Simon insisted on the need for water supply reforms in all residential buildings in London. Victorian society stubbornly ignored the alarming reports from medical experts regarding the situation of domestic servants. The aristocracy believed that caring for the health of servants was exclusively their private matter. The publication of Dr. Simon's reports in the press sparked a storm of indignation from conservative circles. He was accused of attempting to undermine the traditional foundations of the British family and stir up class conflict. Nevertheless, the medical evidence he had gathered could not simply be silenced or refuted. Simon conducted a detailed chemical analysis of the diets of various categories of domestic workers. He concluded that the servants' food was almost entirely devoid of essential vitamins and minerals. The lack of fresh meat and greens led to the development of latent scurvy. The doctor recommended that employers include a mandatory portion of fresh vegetables and high-quality milk in the servants' meals. These recommendations were met with ridicule and complete disregard by most homeowners. A constant fear of being fired created enormous psychological stress among the kitchen staff. Maids suffered from chronic insomnia, hysteria, and deep depression. Dr. Simon's scientific works laid the foundation for future health and social reforms in England. They proved that behind the outward prosperity of Victorian mansions lay a veritable epidemic of exhaustion. But how long could the exhausted servants endure such treatment without trying to resist the system? In the next chapter, you'll learn how hidden discontent escalated into an open revolt against the oatmeal lady in one of London's wealthiest neighbourhoods. We'll recount a real-life case of collective protest by servants and the unexpected consequences it led to. In the summer of 1872, the quiet and respectable neighbourhood of Belgravia was shaken by an event unheard of at the time. The servants of one of the largest mansions on Eaton Square went on an open strike against their intolerable food conditions. The rebellion was sparked by the housekeeper's decision to replace the evening meal of cold cuts with watery oatmeal. Oatmeal was considered food for the poor and prison inmates, but certainly not for respectable domestic staff. A senior footman named William Jones, who had served in the household for more than 5 years, led the protest. William Jones secretly gathered all the kitchen and stable staff in the basement late one evening. The light from a single dim candle barely illuminated the weary faces of those gathered. He spoke at length and passionately, urging his colleagues to act together for the common good. Jones proposed that they take drastic measures and refuse to perform their daily duties the following day. This was an extremely bold and truly dangerous move for everyone present. Such an act threatened inevitable imprisonment for all participants in the kitchen strike. In Victorian England at the time, there was a very strict law governing masters and servants. According to this harsh legislation, any unauthorized refusal to work was considered a serious criminal offense. The police had every right to arrest the striking workers right at their workplaces. Nevertheless, months of agonizing hunger proved stronger than the fear of severe punishment. Outrage at the injustice reigning in the mansion united the usually divided household staff. The servants made a solemn vow to one another to stand their ground until the very end. The next morning, the master's breakfast was not served at the strictly designated time. This outrageous event completely disrupted the centuries-old and unshakable ritual of the wealthy estate. The owner of the vast house, an influential member of Parliament, Sir Thomas Campbell, came down to the dining room. To his utter astonishment, he found the dining room completely empty and eerily cold. The fireplaces had not been lit, and not a single piece of cutlery was on the enormous dining table. The silence in the mansion seemed ominous and foreshadowed serious trouble for the master of the house. Enraged, Sir Thomas immediately descended the steep staircase to the servants' cellar. There, he encountered a united group of his servants, led by the calm William Jones. The footman stepped forward and, politely but with unusual firmness, read aloud a list of collective demands. These points directly concerned the immediate improvement of the daily food rations for all junior staff. They categorically demanded the return of high-quality fresh meat at least several times a week. The servants also asked that the meagre oatmeal for dinner be discontinued and that the portions of bread distributed be significantly increased. Sir Thomas Campbell was deeply outraged by the unheard-of audacity of his powerless subordinates. As an influential aristocrat, he flatly refused to engage in any negotiations with the rebels. Instead, the mansion's owner immediately sent for a squad of city police. He demanded the immediate arrest of the ringleaders of the revolt for gross violation of the terms of their employment contract. William Jones and the 2 boldest kitchen maids were taken into custody on the spot. They were escorted to the nearest London police station for questioning. The fate of the rest of the household staff proved no less dire and tragic. All the servants who had supported the strike were immediately fired and thrown out onto the street. Sir Thomas Campbell categorically refused to pay them their due wages for the past month. Furthermore, the employer deprived them of the required letters of recommendation, without which it was impossible to find work. The influential parliamentarian intended to stage a high-profile, exemplary trial. Through such cruel means, he hoped to teach all discontented servants in the British capital a lesson they would never forget. The court hearing, presided over by the esteemed Judge Thomas Henry, began a few days later. This unusual trial immediately attracted enormous attention from the entire London press. The courtroom was packed to capacity with curious onlookers and reporters from leading publications. Journalists from the capital's newspapers saw this high-profile case as an excellent news story. They decided to publicly raise the long-simmering issue of the complete lack of rights enjoyed by domestic servants. For the first time, society turned its attention to the lives of those who ensured the comfort of the elite. In the courtroom, William Jones had the opportunity to openly tell the truth about life in the mansion. He described in all its shocking detail the chronic hunger the servants constantly endured. As irrefutable evidence, the footman presented the judge with samples of their daily meals. These were pieces of green, mouldy bread and a can of rancid cooking fat. It was precisely these spoiled foods that the greedy housekeeper regularly and mercilessly fed them. This physical evidence caused a real shock and heated discussion among those present in the courtroom. Judge Thomas Henry found himself in a very difficult and extremely delicate position due to the enormous public outcry. On the one hand, the law strictly required severe punishment for the rebellious servants. On the other hand, the presented evidence of cruel treatment evoked immense sympathy from the general public. A shrewd lawyer, hired specifically with funds from a charitable society, came to the servants' defense. He skillfully built his defense around the master's own gross violation of his basic obligations to his staff. The trial threatened to escalate into a large-scale public exposé of the lifestyle of the entire British aristocracy. In the end, after much deliberation, the judge handed down a surprisingly lenient and compromising sentence. William Jones was sentenced to only a symbolic fine. He managed to avoid an actual prison term in a dreadful penal colony. The arrested kitchen maids were completely acquitted of criminal charges. The court took into account their very young age and noted the girls' obvious physical exhaustion. It was officially acknowledged that Sir Thomas Campbell had indeed failed to provide adequate conditions for his workers. This unexpected court decision set an incredibly important and high-profile precedent. It clearly demonstrated that the unlimited power of wealthy employers over their servants has its legal limits. However, London's aristocratic society viewed this verdict as a dangerous signal. Many wealthy mansion owners hurried to slightly revise their servants' diets. Housekeepers were strictly ordered to monitor the quality of food more closely to prevent further strikes. Meanwhile, William Jones's own career as a domestic servant was permanently over. The bold footman was instantly blacklisted by all the elite employment agencies. He was never again able to find work in a respectable household and was forced to change professions. The dismissed kitchen maids also faced enormous difficulties without good references. One of them was helped by the well-known philanthropist Angela Burdett Cutt, who placed the young woman in a sewing workshop. Another rebel was forced to return in disgrace to her very poor village, her health ruined. Nevertheless, their courageous act went down in the history of the 19th century British labour movement. The strike in Belgravia clearly demonstrated that even the most disenfranchised people are capable of uniting to defend their dignity. But hunger in Victorian homes was determined not only by the quality of food, but also by the very layout of the buildings. The architectural designs of that era literally condemned servants to constant isolation and physical suffering. In the next chapter, we will examine how the layout of manor houses helped the owners hide their dark secrets from prying eyes. How exactly were stone walls and labyrinths of corridors used to control starving people? Victorian mansions were built as complex engineering structures designed to showcase the owner's social status. The layout of each building strictly adhered to the idea of separating the masters and the servants into two isolated worlds. Blueprints of famous estates reveal a complex system of secret passages. Servants were expected to perform their duties quickly and discreetly, like invisible ghosts emerging from the basement. Any unauthorized appearance of a servant in the formal reception rooms was considered a gross violation of household etiquette. The estate's kitchens were located a considerable distance from the formal dining rooms to prevent odors from spreading. This meant that prepared dishes had to be carried through long, cold corridors and passageways. Most kitchen areas were located in semi-basements or ground floors with small windows near the ceiling. Natural sunlight barely penetrated these gloomy stone chambers throughout the year. Dim gas lamps or cheap tallow candles were used for lighting, filling the air with soot. The walls were covered with a layer of soot and grease, which the servants had to regularly scrub off with strong chemicals. In such conditions, kitchen workers spent most of their waking lives sacrificing their health and eyesight. Ventilation problems in basement kitchens remained unresolved throughout the 19th century. The heat from the enormous stoves accumulated in the enclosed space of the basements, creating an unbearable microclimate. In the summer, the air temperature at the cook's workstations often exceeded an extreme 45 degrees Celsius. The young women suffered from heat stroke and chronic dehydration, with no opportunity to catch their breath. The household's owners rarely visited the basements, leaving control over working conditions entirely to the housekeeper. The estate's architecture also ensured the servants' complete isolation from their families and the outside world. The servants' bedrooms were located in the attics directly under the roof, accessible via a separate, inconspicuous staircase. In summer, these rooms were stiflingly hot, and in winter, the temperature dropped below freezing. Servants were strictly forbidden from receiving guests, relatives, or friends in their modest living quarters. Any violation of this rule was punished by immediate dismissal without explanation from the owner. All life in the house was governed by a complex mechanical bell system controlled from the master's quarters. In the kitchen, there was a special panel with numerous numbered bells mounted on springs. Each bell corresponded to a specific room and required an immediate response from the servant on duty. This constant, sharp, metallic ringing kept the kitchen staff in a state of perpetual nervous tension. Servants had to drop everything and rush to answer the master's call at any hour of the day or night. Pantries containing expensive foodstuffs, spices and wines were designed as veritable safes within the estate. The doors were reinforced with iron and equipped with complex locks, the keys to which were kept by the butler. Daily food rations were distributed strictly on schedule and required the chef's personal signature in the logbook. Any discrepancy in weight or portion size was treated as theft, with all the legal consequences that entailed. This architecture of control made it virtually impossible for starving kitchen workers to secretly consume food. Architectural labyrinths of isolation reliably guarded the grim secrets of Victorian mansions for many decades. But time marched on, and the industrial 19th century inevitably demanded a radical re-evaluation of social standards. Doctors' diaries, reformers' speeches, and bold strikes by servants began to gradually undermine this seemingly eternal system. To conclude this episode, we'll take stock of this long and difficult struggle for human dignity in the kitchens of grand estates. What historical conclusion did this cruel world of hidden hunger and invisible slavery in houses of plenty reach? The efforts of reformers such as Dr. John Simon and Chef Charles Francatelli revealed the true cost behind the glittering Victorian facade. Their tenacious struggle and dedication to their cause helped draw public attention to the hidden tragedy of domestic servants. By the early 20th century, advances in household appliances, new laws, and labor unions had forever changed working conditions in kitchens. The economy of starvation gave way to fairer standards of nutrition and respect for the basic rights of workers. The sacrifices of thousands of nameless kitchen maids were not in vain. They became an important step toward modern labor laws. This story compels us to take a fresh look at familiar pages of history and appreciate today's achievements. Which part of today's story did you find most surprising or shocking? Share your thoughts in the comments below this video. Every word you share is very important for the channel's growth. Let us know what other little-known aspects of daily life in past eras you'd like us to explore in detail in future episodes. Subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and stay tuned so you don't miss out on new, exciting historical investigations.